Hi everyone, and welcome back to Cure CLCN6. In today's video, I want to talk to you about cell and gene therapy and why that matters, not just at an individual level, but from a societal level as a whole. Let's start with talking about gene editing and gene therapy and the difference between the two. Gene editing, as I had mentioned in a previous video, is where scientists are able to go into our DNA, our genome, and correct mutations at the base level. What that means is that our DNA is kind of like computer code, if you really think about it. It's like a sequence of letters. When mutations happen, those letters can be incorrect. And that's what causes challenges for people like Paxton. He has a single base letter mutation where one of his letters is incorrect. With gene editing and using the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, we have the capability to put someone in a lab today and manipulate their DNA so that we are correcting the mutation. Conceivably, this would be a one-shot deal. You could bring someone into a lab today and you could correct the DNA at the base level. And that person, for all intents and purposes, would be cured. It sounds like science fiction, but it is reality. It does exist, and it is happening in clinical trials throughout the world right now. Why is that not being done at a mass level for people like Paxton? That's because the safety and efficacy is still being tested on it. As I mentioned in the previous video, it's not 100% safe yet to do gene editing for everyone because there's still a risk of off-target edits, meaning we might not hit the intended target, or you could make a correction on the intended target, but also unintended targets. Why that would be a big deal, there's specifically a concern with cancer. In our DNA, we have a lot of genes that help our immune system to suppress tumors and suppress cancer before it even starts, when that cellular turnover is happening. These genes help to prevent tumors from developing. If there are off-target edits, and we don't know what those are until after the fact, you could have people that have their cancer-fighting genes manipulated, and now they're going to start developing cancers at an uncontrollable rate. And even if we're able to help treat that cancer, remove the tumor, use chemotherapy or radiation, it's going to come back in another form somewhere else in the body because their immune system is now compromised. That's one of the big risks. The other challenge with gene editing and really gene therapy as a whole is the cost. As I had also mentioned in a previous video, it cost about $1.5 million to develop the vectors that are needed to deliver the therapeutics to either edit the DNA or to provide a gene replacement or to suppress a toxic protein, such as in Paxton's case. So the cost is also extremely prohibitive, but I'm going to come back to the cost and why investing in cell and gene therapy, it would actually save us a lot of money as a whole from a societal standpoint in a little bit. The other option with gene therapies is, well, gene therapy itself, where we are able to suppress mutant proteins, toxic proteins, like Paxton's body is producing, and we can also provide functioning copies of the cell as well, like the plan is for Paxton. So two different things. You can do gene editing, which is where you correct the DNA at the base level, or you can do gene therapy, where you are either managing the kind of mutation by you're eliminating the toxic protein when it gets produced, and or providing a functioning copy of the protein that is needed for the cells to function properly. Here's how it could save a lot of money. I said it costs $1.5 million to produce a vector to deliver the therapeutics, to edit the DNA, or to provide functioning copies, or to suppress toxic proteins. If you look at some individuals, we'll use Rett syndrome as an example because that is a mutation which causes some profound challenges for the individuals affected. But we also know that the life expectancy with Rett is midlife. So it's well short of what the normal life expectancy is for the human population. But we do know that it's probably into your 30s or 40s, midlife. If you take a baby that is born with Rett syndrome, probably around the first year of life, you're going to notice that they are not developing properly. And it may take a couple years to get to that diagnosis that this child has a mutation known as Rett syndrome that is causing their challenges. That child is going to need a lifetime of support, including physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. They may need like nursing assistance in the house. You may have a parent that is no longer to work because they have to provide for this child. So you're removing a parent from the workforce. You're going to have a plethora of doctor's appointments. This child may develop seizures. They may need anti-seizure medicine to be administered regularly. They may need steroids administered to them. And they're going to need that for about 3 or 4 decades. If you take the total cost that it requires to support an individual with Rett syndrome and their family over the course of that person's lifetime, it's going to be millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. But what if the CRISPR technology advances to a point where you could take that child that's been diagnosed with this mutation and you could correct the DNA at the base level? You could theoretically cure this individual, and you would be looking at a child who could live a happy, healthy, full life that may not need prolonged support with occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy. They may not suffer from the seizures. They may be able to live a full and healthy life just as a child without a genetic mutation. Now, we don't know that for sure because that has not been fully tested yet, but theoretically, that is quite possible because once the mutation is corrected, that child receives those rehabilitative services, they're going to thrive. They should no longer be suffering the ill effects of the mutation. That alone would save hundreds of millions of dollars in the healthcare industry in the United States each year. I also wanted to share with you an anecdote about cell and gene therapy, because the very first cell and gene therapy that was approved by the FDA was in December of 2023. That's right, less than 1 year ago, the very first FDA approved cell and gene therapy became available in the United States. That is to treat sickle cell anemia for patients 12 years and older. It's a very rigorous process because it is done using what they call ex vivo. So they are not injecting the AAV into the individual to go manipulate the cells. What they are doing is a little bit more complex, and I don't have the science right in front of me, but they are editing some of the red blood cells in a petri dish, really, and then they are going to inject that into the individual. But that is now an FDA-approved treatment. So we have gene therapy that is curing people of sickle cell anemia. And what I wanted to tell you is that I had experience working with a young lady about 14 years ago who had sickle cell anemia. She was a single mom. She was a teen parent going to high school. And I often had to help her go to the hospital because when she would have an attack, it was completely debilitating to her. The only treatment they could do was palliative care, where they would give her morphine because the pain was so intense. You can imagine that when you're a parent, let alone a single parent, and you're trying to finish high school, how derailing that can be. But really, at any point in your life, you could suffer from these flare-ups, sometimes once a month, sometimes multiple times a month. It may be once a year, it could just be a couple times a year. That, like most other mutations, is a spectrum of how people are impacted. But sickle cell anemia does impact people's life expectancy as well, because when they have an attack like that, the organs are being damaged. So slowly over time, every time there's a flare-up or an attack, it is damaging the patient's body. So I have seen firsthand how devastating that some of these mutations can be, not only from my son's standpoint, but even things like sickle cell anemia. So it is fantastic news that there is now a gene therapy that can help these individuals, that can save them a lifetime of pain, a lifetime of suffering, and allow them to live a full, healthy life that's not going to shorten their life expectancy. It's going to allow them to work. Because some people with sickle cell anemia, they're not able to work. So they are collecting Social Security, disability insurance, or supplemental, security income. But now we have people that are going to be able to fully work. So I know that a lot of conversations revolve around the cost to society. Like, we're putting dollar amounts on the values of people's lives, which is ridiculous. These are human beings that we're talking about here. But if you want to look at it just from a dollar and cents standpoint, it is still more cost effective to government and to a society as a whole to treat individuals with sickle cell anemia than it is to just provide that palliative care of managing the symptoms and giving them painkillers whenever there's a flare-up. Last thing I wanted to talk to you about why cell and gene therapy is important for all of us and for society as a whole, is that there are some mutations that people have that are not going to manifest themselves until later in life. When you have kids like Paxton, or kids with Rett syndrome or sickle cell anemia, we know pretty early on, within the first handful of years of that child's life, that something is wrong. Something is affecting this person's development and their ability to eventually have independent, living skills. It's affecting their motor planning, affecting their speech, affecting their cognition. But there's other types of mutations and these rare diseases that don't manifest until early adulthood, sometimes late adulthood, and sometimes juvenile onset. So meaning late childhood, early teens. There are people out there right now walking around who have these mutations and that they are going to develop these rare diseases and they don't know it yet. And that is all because that they have a genetic mutation that has not manifested itself yet. These individuals would also benefit from gene editing and gene therapy. So therefore, it is crucial that we are investing as a society our resources into developing cell and gene therapies. Not only because we're going to greatly improve the quality of people's lives, but also because it is going to be more cost effective to just correct someone's DNA or provide a functioning copy of a cell or knock out a toxic protein than it is to just manage the symptoms and provide that rehabilitative care, occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, in-home nursing, anti-seizure medicine. There's a whole variety of challenges that individuals can go through. So how can you help? Well, I think what we can do just as a society is encourage our legislators, whether it's your local legislatures, state, federal, encourage them to invest into cell and gene therapy research. Encourage them to put money into developing these therapeutics. Encourage them to support clinical trials for some of the more common mutations that afflict people, as well as the less common ones, like my son Paxton. And we really want to focus on an investment into scaling up the production of the vectors that are needed to provide the medicine. The cell and gene therapy field as a whole is fairly confident that the technology is going to advance enough where gene editing will become precise and safe and effective, probably sometime within the next 10 years. What they are not as confident in is that the cost to develop the vectors, like the AAVs that Paxton needs, is going to be brought down. And that is going to put a massive burden on families like myself, who have to now raise the funds in order to pay for their child or their loved one's life-saving treatments. But if we can contact our legislatures, we can nominate people who are going to take cell and gene therapy seriously, that is going to have massive positive ramifications for society as a whole. So I thank you all very much for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.